Going to get started. I want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to dive into the findings from Points of Light's newly released report called From Nice to Necessary, Unleashing the Impact of Volunteering Through Transformative Investment. Whether you've had a chance to read the report or if you're joining us to actually learn a little bit more, we believe you'll find a lot of value in today's session. We'll share key insights, actionable steps, and we'll explore ways we can all contribute to strengthening volunteering and its impact. We just have an hour for our discussion today, and we are going to do our best to save some time for questions at the end. But the Q&A feature and the chat are also available, so please feel free to ask your questions there, and we will do our best to answer those as they come up. And lastly, I do want to say that we'll be recording this session, so for you to know it's being recorded, but also if anyone wants to revisit it later. Before we start, I want to quickly introduce the co-presenters today. First of all, my name is Diane Quest. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Points of Light. And joining me today are representing the Bridgespan Group and their support informing the research that is incorporated into this. We have the Senior Manager, Erica Caballero Montoya. On the Points of Light side, I'm joined by Farzana Habawala, our Vice President of Research and Insights, and Megan Singer, our Vice President of Strategy. And both of them spent a lot of time with Erica and her team in the development of this report. So big round of gratitude and applause for all of you. I want to do a little bit of context setting about Points of Light. Points of Light recently updated our mission to reflect a new actually renewed focus on volunteering within the broader civic engagement space. We accomplish our mission through these program buckets that you're taking a look at. And ultimately, we work to support a vision in which every person will discover their power to make a difference and create healthy communities in vibrant participatory societies. A little bit of a historical perspective on volunteering and why we made this shift in our strategy and in our mission. You all will probably not be surprised that volunteer rates have really stagnated, dropping during the pandemic and rebounding to some extent, but really steadily holding between 20 and 30% over the last decade. This really leaves an urgent community need unmet and places unsustainable pressure on nonprofit staff, which I would imagine a lot of you feel. Nearly half of whom are already struggling to recruit enough volunteers, and 29% of whom are facing funding cuts that harm capacity to lead programming. We even highlight in our report that according to our affiliate network, nearly half, 50% of critical volunteer roles go unfilled each year, adding significant strain on nonprofit organizations that are already under pressure. This is not a news story, but through over a year of strategic planning and stakeholder engagement, we really felt the time was right for Points of Light to step firmly back into this space, owning our history and our expertise and leveraging our strengths to meet the needs of today. So this is reflected in a summarized strategy on a page where we highlight the impact that we intend for our work and the strategic priorities that we believe will get us there. So why this report and why now? It's actually part of this overall strategy. We see this report as the beginning of our new strategic direction, and the intent was to really call to action and to highlight the critical nature of volunteering in our world today. So I'm going to stop for a second on the presentation and ask you all a question. We're going to do a poll. And the question is, do you think volunteering is being fully utilized in your organization or community? And it's a yes, a somewhat, or a no. So I'm going to pause while everybody clicks on their answer. We're using this as a little bit of an opportunity to get some feedback from all of you. So thank you for participating. All right, team, are we ready to show? Okay, so we're seeing yes, which is awesome. And we want to be in touch with you because we want to understand how you're doing that. A bit of a mixed bag after that with somewhat and with no. So it sounds like a lot of you really are facing challenges with volunteer engagement. And that's precisely what this report focuses on. So today we'll talk about how to align nonprofits with funders and improve the way we consider volunteers' impact. As we move into the details of the report, I do want to give a big thank you to the UPS Foundation and Phillips 66 for their support. And again, this work would not have been possible without a really amazing partnership with the Bridgespan Group. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Erica.
Thank you, Diane. Thanks for the invitation to this webinar, and thank you for your partnership in this work, and thanks everyone for joining us today. One of the starting points for this report was the recognition that the impact and costs of volunteering have often been overlooked, even by organizations like ours at Bridgespan. Despite our work over the past 25 years in nonprofit advisory work and social sector research, volunteering has not been consistently centered in our frameworks, funding analysis, or field building conversations. So with this in mind, our goal was to build on existing research and supplement it with targeted qualitative and quantitative analysis, not just to validate what we already knew, but also to deepen our understanding of the cycle of underinvestment in volunteering engagement and also its consequences. Our approach to this work included several key components. First, we reviewed over 50 academic papers, reports, publications focused on trends and impacts of volunteering engagement, nonprofit capacity, and also social impact. We then conducted interviews and focus group conversations with over 60 stakeholders, including nonprofit leaders, intermediaries, corporate partners, philanthropic funders, and field experts. And we carried out a quantitative analysis of funding data, looking at trends across different types of funders to try to understand those flows a little bit better. Throughout this process, we focused on surfacing both gaps in terms of impacts and costs, and also we tried to quantify the funding flows to start characterizing the scale of underinvestment in volunteer infrastructure and engagement. The report is structured around three main sections. The first one is an overview of perceptions and funding of volunteering. The second one is an exploration of the impact of volunteering on individuals, communities, and societies, and also the costs associated in doing this well. And finally, a set of recommendations on the resources and infrastructure that are needed to fully realize the impact of volunteering. We originally approached this work expecting it to be a call to action for funders. However, through our research, we realized that the cycle of underinvestment, it's not just a funding issue, it's a systemic challenge that limits the potential of volunteering to drive social impact. And as a result, breaking this cycle will require action not just from funders, but also across the entire sector. Now I will pass it over to Farzana and Megan, who will dive deeper into the key findings of the report.
Thanks, Erica. We started this work wanting to evaluate the impact of volunteering the way Points of Light views it, through a multifaceted lens that touches both individuals and communities, but also society at large. Despite how central volunteers are to so many nonprofits, we still don't have a comprehensive understanding of their true impact. We know volunteering improves mental health, it builds skills and creates social connections. It helps nonprofits deliver services that would otherwise go unfunded or understaffed. And beyond that, it strengthens democracy and bridges divides, especially in times of growing social isolation and polarization. But here's the challenge. We rarely measure or fund these broader outcomes. Most organizations track basic outputs like hours served because that's what's manageable with current systems. But volunteer hours don't tell the full story. Very few nonprofits are equipped to measure deeper outcomes like how volunteers improve educational outcomes, or how volunteers reduce food insecurity, or how volunteers contribute to social cohesion in polarized communities. So volunteers are powering everything from food pantries to disaster response, and yet we're not capturing the full value of that labor. We have rich anecdotal evidence and some compelling case examples, but most organizations lack the tools, the time, or funding to evaluate broader social impact. This is a huge gap that makes it hard for funders, policymakers, and even nonprofit leaders to understand the real return on investment from volunteering. One of the most powerful examples of volunteering impact is youth mentorship. Right now, about 16 million children and youth across the United States are in need of a mentor, and most of those mentors are volunteers. Most mentorship programs aren't one-off engagements. Many of these relationships span years and can change the trajectory of a young person's life. That kind of consistency creates trust and resilience, and it's directly linked to better outcomes in education, mental health, and even long-term employment. But building a strong mentorship program doesn't just happen. It takes investment. It takes recruiting, training, background checks, ongoing support, all of which cost time and money. These programs need the right staff, the tools, the systems in place to ensure safety, quality, and consistency. And that infrastructure is often invisible to outsiders, but it's absolutely essential. So when we underinvest in these systems, what we're really doing is limiting our reach. We're saying no to a child on a wait list. Another example is disaster recovery. We know disasters are becoming more frequent and more intense, and volunteers are often the first to show up. They play an essential role, not just in the immediate response, things like cleanup, supply distribution, and staffing shelters, but also in long-term recovery. Consider legal aid, the translators, the rebuilding crews. These are specialized roles filled by everyday people donating their time and skills. Volunteer contributions in disaster response can triple the value of financial donations. That's a massive return on investment. But that only happens when the systems are in place for their efforts to be coordinated and equipped properly. Without that backbone infrastructure, like training and volunteer management, efforts can fall apart or even create more harm than good. When volunteer infrastructure is strong, communities recover faster and more equitably. When it's weak, the burden shifts back to already overwhelmed local governments or gets absorbed by nonprofits running on fumes. So again, we see that the impact of volunteers hinges on investment in systems. Let's do an audience check. You should all see this poll. So let us know, do you have a way to measure the impact of volunteers that goes beyond number of volunteers and hours? I'll give you a couple of minutes here. Yeah, so looks like the results from the poll, this is a really common theme across the sector. The majority of organizations still rely on volunteer counts and hours served. And while that's a start, it doesn't really capture the impact volunteers are making on your mission. And you're not alone. This came through strongly in our report as well. Most nonprofits don't have the infrastructure, the tools, or staff capacity to track deeper outcomes, like how a tutor helps boost literacy, or having a mentor improves graduation rates. But that kind of data is really powerful. It's what helps you tell your story to funders and make the case for support. The good news is that even small shifts, like collecting feedback from program staff about volunteer contributions or tracking milestones for clients served by volunteers, can start to build a stronger narrative of impact. I'll pass it on to Megan for the next.
Thank you, Farzana. So we started wanting to understand the current data landscape around the impact of volunteering, and then really wanted to consider looking at the cost of volunteer engagement and what it takes to support these efforts effectively. What we found is that, I'm sure what many of you already know, that volunteer engagement requires significant investment. The full life cycle encompasses everything from recruiting, training, managing, to retaining volunteers. But what we found is these costs are rarely quantified or funded. The truth is, volunteering is not free. It costs money to manage these individuals, and most nonprofit organizations don't have the resources to track or cover these expenses. Why is it so hard to quantify this cost? Really, there are many challenges when it comes to quantifying the cost of volunteer engagement. Really, the costs vary greatly depending on the volunteering role, the program the volunteers are supporting, the systems in place, sometimes even the issue area volunteers are supporting. So understanding these costs is crucial for making the case for more support, but that also means there's not one simple number to use widely across the sector. There's so much variance. And so what we can't underscore enough is that nonprofits need better tools, systems, and support to track volunteer costs and measure the return on investment. Without this infrastructure, it's difficult to make a strong case for funding. So once again, want to use you all as a focus group, and we're curious, does your organization measure the cost of engaging a volunteer? Give it just a second for the results. Okay, I think we can stop and share. So there's some diversity in the answers, but by and large, the majority is leaning toward no. And so I think what's really resounding here and hopefully validating is that many organizations still don't have a full picture of what volunteer engagement costs, and that's completely understandable. So what I'll say is one of the next steps we hope to take as a sector is to identify the organizations that are doing this well. There are some 15% of you who are saying yes. We want to identify these bright spots and figure out how can we share these approaches and help apply them widely across the sector, so it's not, we can really flip these percentages, and this is not smaller bright spots, but something that's widely adopted. Farzana, I'm going to turn it back to you for the next finding.
So of course, we also wanted to know what perceptions of volunteering look like. One of the most critical challenges we uncovered is the disconnect between how nonprofits and funders perceive the value of volunteers. This is validated from other research from the Dogood Institute that shows that 72% of nonprofits say volunteers improve service quality, but only 25% of funders agree. That's a massive perception gap, and it has consequences. It means nonprofits are often hesitant to ask for support for volunteer engagement, assuming funders won't be interested. And on the flip side, many funders say they'd be open to supporting these efforts, only if nonprofits could better articulate the cost and value of volunteers. So this misalignment reduces trust and limits the case for long-term flexible funding. And it's not about bad intent. It's often about the lack of shared data and shared language. When we look at corporate funders, the picture is somewhat better, but still not where it needs to be. Corporate funders are a bit more likely to support volunteer programs, especially those tied to employee engagement. But even then, most of that funding goes towards one-day events, not sustainable infrastructure. There's a growing opportunity here. Companies can evolve from offering just hands-on help to providing holistic support, like funding technology, staffing, or training that enables sustainable engagement. But pairing funding with people is important, and focusing on nonprofit-defined needs, corporations can greatly amplify the value and impact of their engagement. This misalignment isn't just a numbers issue. It's a missed opportunity that is actively stalling progress. Funders say they want to support scalable, high-impact solutions, and volunteer engagement often delivers just that, and yet it's left out of the equation. The data shows us that in the past decade, just 0.19% of the total US foundation and public charity funding has been directed specifically to volunteer engagement. And when you look at the top 10 US foundations, that number drops to 0.07%. Essentially rounding error in their portfolios. This underinvestment leaves critical volunteer infrastructure under-resourced and nonprofits scrambling to support volunteers with minimal tools or staff. What we do know is that there is not a single cause or issue area that can fully achieve success without volunteers. Yet, we're missing a huge opportunity. Volunteers are a force multiplier, but only if they're effectively supported. If we don't fund the systems that enable their impact, we're leaving value on the table. So tell us, how is it in your organization? Do you have funding that is dedicated to volunteer engagement? So it looks like from the poll results, most of you responded with yes, or a good percentage with somewhat. And this tracks with what we found in the report. Having dedicated funding for volunteer engagement means your organization is recognizing this as critical infrastructure, not just a side program. It means you can plan more strategically to invest in better systems and deliver a stronger experience. We'd love to hear from those who said yes, how you've made that case, whether it's internal budgeting, grants, or corporate support, because others may be looking for ways to do the same. One of the key takeaways from our report is that when funders see volunteerism as essential to mission delivery, the funding starts to flow. So the more we tell that story backed with data and results, the more we can normalize volunteer investment across the sector. And if you're one of those who said no, we know that when we don't fund this work intentionally, it limits our reach and strains staff capacity. It also sends this unintended message that volunteerism is free or not worthy of investment. But the opposite is true. When we fund volunteer programs well, we get incredible returns, more reach, more impact, stronger communities. So if you're one of the many without dedicated funding, know that you're not alone, but let's work together to change the narrative. Back to you, Megan.
Thank you. So let me piece these sections together and really tie these findings into a holistic story that Erica really already previewed for all of you. As we look at these findings, it becomes clear that there is a cycle of underinvestment in volunteering, and it's holding the sector back. It's self-reinforcing, it continues to perpetuate itself, and it makes it harder for nonprofits to access the resources they need. This visual is a little bit of an idea of what this looks like. And I really can't emphasize enough that we went into this report with a hypothesis that we were really only going to be talking to funders on this webinar, but there are multiple players contributing to this cycle. So nonprofits oftentimes need more support for volunteer engagement, but they struggle to get it to a few challenges, from the lack of compelling data on the impact of volunteering and the costs of volunteering, and a perception that funders aren't interested in investing in volunteer engagement, making many organizations hesitant to ask for support. The paradox here is that many funders indicated they would be willing to invest more if they had the data to show the impact of volunteer engagement, but very few are funding the research or tools needed to generate that data. This is creating a persistent gap between the potential of volunteer-powered impact and the actual investment it receives. Let's bring this to life through an example of an organization, just in case you're not someone experiencing this. So imagine a nonprofit running a successful food bank program with the help of dedicated volunteers. They're tracking volunteer hours, but they don't have the data to show how those volunteers are not only providing food, but also reducing food insecurity, improving the mental health of the families they serve, or fostering community connections. Without data to demonstrate these broader outcomes, the nonprofit struggles to make the case for more funding. They might miss opportunities for grants or corporate partnerships because they can't show the full value of their volunteer efforts. As a result, they receive less support than they need, even though the potential for their volunteer program to dive deeper, long-term impact is significant. This is where the lack of data on volunteer impact limits both the nonprofit's ability to advocate for itself and the broader societal value volunteers bring. This is the cycle in action: lack of data, lack of funding, limited impact. Want to use you all again? So we're curious, can you relate to this cycle of underinvestment? Okay, I think we're good to share. Thank you. I'm going to call that a pretty resounding yes, somewhat leaning towards some experience with this. So this cycle really is common in this sector. It's one of the key issues our report addresses. When nonprofits lack data or resources, it becomes much harder to make the case for funding. The good news is that by identifying this cycle, our hope is to take steps to break the cycle, and push to invest in the systems and data that will help make the case for volunteer engagement as an essential resource. We are not only interested in sharing the challenges today and in this report, we want to talk about potential solutions that we can develop together. So I'm going to turn it over to Diane to share that.
Thank you, Megan. And I said this in the chat too, but I really appreciate all of your conversation in the chat. It's such a good opportunity to share both challenges and know that you're not alone, but also share knowledge. I've picked up a couple of just interesting tidbits, so appreciate your engagement. As Megan said, we've discussed the challenges, but the good news is there's a clear path forward. And the key to making progress is working together as a sector. And Alex, I would say we appreciate your input, because this is both nonprofits and funders. By taking action collectively, we can address these challenges and unlock the full potential of volunteering and volunteerism. And I would say, as we get into the recommendations, they're not groundbreaking, right? Better data is a clear necessity. We need to deepen our understanding of how volunteerism really drives community and societal outcomes, not just individual transformation, although that is important as well. This includes measuring how volunteers help nonprofits achieve their outcomes and the outcomes that their funders really care about. Better infrastructure. Nonprofits need standardized tools and more resources to assess the true cost of effective volunteer engagement. This will help funders better understand what their dollars are actually supporting and enable smarter investments. And then the last one, as a communicator, is my favorite, and it's more dialogue. I think it's interesting what Alex shared in the chat, that a lot of nonprofits don't bring this up, don't request, don't select, and share that they need funding for volunteering infrastructure. And Sue made a great point. It's because it's often not easily selectable. It's not part of the ongoing conversation. So with shared data on outcomes and costs, we can actually bridge the gap between funders and nonprofits. Aligning expectations and goals helps to build trust and leads to more strategic, sustainable investments in volunteering. Another poll. I hope you're not getting tired of the polls. We appreciate the insights. Which of these three selections feels most urgent for your organization? Is it the better data? Is it stronger infrastructure? Is it more dialogue? And understanding that they're not separate or distinct from each other. They are all connected, but curious to know what you think feels most urgent for you as an individual at your organization. All right, I think we're ready to share. Almost equal, not a lot of difference. So data is clearly a priority, and the great news is this isn't something any one organization has to tackle alone. I think working together as a sector and leveraging shared tools and research, we can build a stronger case for volunteer engagement. Strengthen the infrastructure was also, I think, almost equally high, if not a little bit higher. It's a key need for all of us, and it's something that can't be done in isolation. Nonprofits, funders, and corporate partners all have a role to play in ensuring the right tools and systems are in place. So in the next section, we'll dive into how these various groups can collaborate to build the robust infrastructure necessary for sustained volunteer engagement. I'm going to turn it back over to Farzana and Megan.
So let's turn our focus on the solutions. What the report really highlights is that there is a role for each of us to address these gaps and move volunteerism forward. What can nonprofit leaders do right now? First, take stock. Audit your current investment in volunteer infrastructure and look at where the gaps are. Where could targeted investment drive greater impact? Then use the data in this report to make the case internally, to shift budget or staffing towards volunteer engagement as a capacity building function. Show your board or your leadership team that investing in volunteers is about scaling your mission. Start small. You can pilot small changes like onboarding tools or volunteer appreciation programs that demonstrate high return on investment. And track what you can, then measure and share those results. Share stories and advocate for resources that you need to support this work. Show that volunteer engagement isn't overhead, it's a capacity builder. And when you're talking to funders, don't shy away from these conversations. Don't wait for permission. Proactively engage funders in conversations about the strategic value of volunteers. You have the insights, now you will have the data, use it.
For our funders and philanthropic leaders who have joined us today, we want to emphasize that you have the power to lead by changing how we think about volunteer engagement. It's critical to see volunteering as a core capacity, not just an additional program. When properly supported, volunteers can significantly extend the reach and effectiveness of nonprofit work. Consider providing more flexible funding options that allow nonprofits to invest in the infrastructure they need to support volunteers. Rather than limiting support to direct services, making unrestricted funding available can help nonprofits strengthen their volunteer systems and maximize the impact of their programs. It's essential to engage with your grantees about how they measure and support volunteer impact. If they lack the necessary systems or staff to track volunteer outcomes, it's not due to inefficiency, but because of a lack of capacity. Supporting nonprofits with funding for data and measurement tools can go a long way in improving their volunteer engagement and the impact story that you're interested in seeing. You can also use your influence to help educate others in the funding community, showing them that investing in volunteers has a multiplier effect. By investing in volunteers, you're helping nonprofits reach more people, engage more individuals, and create deeper impact. Finally, investing in shared infrastructure like volunteer management platforms or training hubs can benefit multiple organizations. Even a small investment in these tools can dramatically enhance nonprofits' ability to engage and support volunteers at scale.
For our corporate partners, we appreciate all you're doing to get employees involved, but let's take it a step further. This is a unique opportunity to increase both employee engagement and community outcomes. Ask yourself, is your volunteer program helping nonprofits meet their most urgent needs, or is it mainly centered around the employee experience? The best programs are co-designed with nonprofit partners. That means listening to what they need. Don't just show up for a one-day event. Find ways to offer continuity, skill-based support, or long-term commitments. And whenever possible, pair volunteers with funding. Think tech tools, volunteer training, coordination support, or even administrative support to manage your company's participation. These things matter. And internally, make the business case. Elevate volunteerism within your company's culture and strategy. Make the case to executives that this is more than PR. It's about investing in resilient, healthy communities where your employees and customers live and work. Show how it connects to employee retention, leadership development, brand trust. Finally, share your data, but don't stop at volunteer hours. Report on outcomes, nonprofit feedback, and alignment with your company's values. That's the kind of reporting that drives accountability and learning. Let's make corporate volunteerism not just something that looks good, but something that does real good.
And finally, for the volunteer engagement professionals in the virtual room with us, you have an important role to play in bringing the case for volunteer engagement to your leadership team. We hope that this report will offer valuable insights that you can use to start conversations about the true cost of underinvestment in volunteer programs and what's at risk when the support is lacking. It's also important to align your volunteer metrics with broader goals of your organization. If you're focused on improving health, advancing education, promoting equity, highlight how volunteer efforts directly contribute to those outcomes beyond just tracking hours served. Working with colleagues from other departments can also strengthen your case. Together, you can advocate for the systems you need to better track and measure volunteer impact. Building internal support across the organization is a key to making volunteer engagement a core focus. And finally, and hopefully this has come up in our own intentions throughout this conversation, collaborating with others in the field is incredibly valuable. Reach out to peers to share tools, ideas, and best practices. Working together as a sector to improve volunteer engagement can help everyone learn and grow, making a greater collective impact. And so with that, we've shared the role that all of you can play in taking this report from insights to action, but we also want to acknowledge the role that Points of Light can play in this as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Diane to do just that and then wrap us up. Oh, Diane, you are on mute.
Thank you. I'm trying to type in the chat, make sure I stay on cue. So I'm just going to say what I was going to say in the chat back to Sue. Your comment about sort of the public versus the behind the scenes conversations about volunteers, I think is absolutely a great point. And I'd be curious for your insights, Sue. I think part of that is due to this lack of funding and infrastructure to really make sure that volunteer programs within a nonprofit are funded in a way that allows for both staff training to manage effectively and successfully and provide a good experience all around to volunteers, and the dollars to support the volunteer engagement through that life cycle. So I think we're at a point where what you're saying really underscores why we need more investment in the overall system of volunteering. So thank you for the comment. So I will get to the point where we're starting to wrap ourselves up, and we'll continue to answer questions in the chat. And I think we might have time to take a few live questions. This report is not just an exploration of the challenges that we face in volunteerism and in the sector. It's also a call to action. And you heard some of that from Farzana and Megan with specific calls to action for those of us who are here. At Points of Light, we're really committed to responding with a bold strategic initiative that will drive meaningful change. We will create a research advisory council to develop a national research agenda. And I answered a question in the chat. I think it might have just been to the panelists about that. One focus of that work will be on closing the gaps around how volunteering impacts communities and society and individuals as well. We'll help nonprofits build their capacity by supporting them in collecting and using data to better understand and communicate the value of volunteers. This will help nonprofits show the real impact that volunteers have. And we are hoping to launch a national coalition, and that I say hope because we need to enlist and enroll people like you and other organizations to support the creation of a plan that would focus on doubling volunteer participation in the US by 2035. But alongside that, removing some of the barriers and building that infrastructure and creating a place where volunteers will have a good experience that delivers on community-centered needs and services. We will bring partners together from across sectors to create this sort of coordinated effort to make volunteering a central force for good for everyone. With these initiatives, Points of Light aims to play a critical role in making volunteering stronger, more impactful, and more recognized as a key solution to community challenges. So we do hope this has been both helpful and informative. We don't have all the answers yet. This is the beginning of a conversation, and what we want to see is a narrative shift in volunteering among those of us who are here and engaged, but also among a larger cross-sector group of funders and stakeholders who are invested in volunteering's impact. And now that we've explored the recommendations and actionable steps, we'll take a moment to wrap up with a final thought on how we can move forward together. As we've seen today, volunteering is at a crossroads, but this is also an opportunity to make a real difference by changing how we invest in and measure the value of volunteers. Points of Light is leading the way with bold initiatives, but we really can't do this alone. There's so much great work going on in our sector, and we can be a platform for that work. And so we will collaborate with nonprofits, with funders, with companies and communities to make volunteering a cornerstone of social change. And we've laid out some really important steps, whether it's collecting better data, building stronger infrastructure, or having more open and honest dialogue, to Sue's point, between funders and nonprofits. The work really starts now, and together we can build a stronger future for volunteering. So we have left a little bit of time for questions. So I think we have the ability, and I'm relying on our colleague who's behind the beautiful starburst, her name is Kyria, on helping us navigate questions in real time. And while we do that, I'm going to peek back at the chat because I keep seeing it like scroll as I'm talking. I know there's a lot of dialogue going on here, but we will open up for any questions. I see a question from Laura King.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thanks so much for facilitating this. It's a super interesting conversation. And I'd love to be part of a group moving forward that is able to talk about impact that they're seeing throughout their organizations, if that's something that you would be interested in facilitating. So that's part one of my question, of whether that's going to happen or not. And then part two is I'd love to know if anyone has facilitated a study at any point that's more longitudinal in nature. So looking at the impact of volunteers over a long period of time. I'm curious if that's been done in any organizations.
Farzana, I'll let you take that one, and then I will also throw it to all of our attendees in the chat. I think I saw that question earlier, so if Farzana, you can answer, and if anyone in the chat has seen anything, please share that there as well.
I will say that from my landscape of the research out there, there isn't a study done at a national scale that looks at this longitudinally. There have been smaller studies at smaller geographic levels done over certain spans of time, some of them conducted like twice and thrice, but there isn't a long-running study or anything that can be interpolated back to the national level that I have seen. And I'd love to hear if anyone else is tracking this, but that's something we would love to be able to partner with and really build that evidence base on.
Thank you, Farzana. Thank you, Laura, for the question. Sarah.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
My question is about, I mean, I think, as you said, a lot of us have this basic collection of data in terms of number of volunteers, hours they've contributed. Where would you recommend starting in terms of the kinds of data we should start thinking about collecting if we want to demonstrate a broader impact of our volunteer programs?
A great question, Farzana. I'll let you take that one.
I think that that's a question that a lot of organizations could pool together. I feel like it bridges between that practice and research. So we need to bring it together and think about in your evaluation programs of your actual programs, what you're tracking, and then build that into a larger research agenda to really inform what this could do at scale.
Thank you, Farzana. Sharonda?
Yes, hello. My name is Sharonda Allen. I'm the founder and executive director of Operation Grow Inc. And I have a consistent youth program with underserved youth that I have to feed. And my organization is hemorrhaging financially because sometimes, we'll get a little money to do, we were a lead agency for Global Youth Service Days. It's still not enough to feed them and to provide all the supplies. And a lot of times funders and organizations, they just want to do like a one-time event and they don't always understand what service learning is. You try to explain it to them, they just don't get it. So I don't think you need to spend a lot of time with the study. If you do want to do a study, I'd like to participate, but the bottom line is that real grassroots organizations that are servicing the youth, that are creating a culture of service like mine, need the funding to get it done. You got to keep the kids coming. You got to keep the young people engaged. And it's not just, hey, we're going to just do this. They have to, be engulfed in this culture of understanding the environment. And now, my before and after data is that now they're telling me they see the world differently. They notice the litter. They understand the plants. They love, like, we're growing food. They're so excited to put seeds in the ground after putting them in pots because they love to have that experience. So those are the little things. And these are high school kids. We just need funding for that. So I don't know if there are funders here, but I guarantee you that's one of the reasons. And another reason for a lack of maybe over 18 volunteers is that people have to work now. You know, people need money. And even if you give a stipend to adult or youth volunteers, that would be good. But you still need to support organizations that are really on the ground doing it, regardless of, you know, the funding, just, you know, making spaghetti at home to take to the kids. So I'd like to be added to the list and, you know, let the funders know, support us, please. And not those same big organizations that get all this money without the real impact. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharonda. I see a lot of good tips and ideas in the chat too. So hopefully everyone's keeping an eye there.
We
I-
do, sorry, we do have a question in the question box on from Lori Humphreys. How do you recommend measuring outcomes of volunteers rather than tracked hours? This could be for the impact of the work, but also for the individuals doing the work. I like what was said earlier, but it was super fast, and I look forward to catching it again on the recording.
I think this is one of the key things that our report really wants to elevate, that the broader outcomes of what the volunteers are doing beyond the number of hours that they're contributing or the number of volunteers contributing to the task is the outcomes that they're achieving. And so looking at how within each issue area, what the volunteers are really changing. For youth mentorship, how are they changing graduation rates? How are they changing educational achievement across there? Those are broad outcomes that are not being tracked at scale. And so conveying those outcomes to funders is going to be powerful. It's also going to be powerful to convey back to the volunteers how volunteering really impacts their own health. Volunteering can literally make you live longer. It improves mortality rates. It improves your physical and mental health. There is a ton of data out there, but we're not communicating that as effectively to volunteers. We're not telling them that, hey, you're doing this and it's improving society, it's improving the individuals that you are volunteering for, but it's also improving your own outcomes. And that conversation is really important. And I think that's where, that's what we're trying to advocate for, that two-way conversation going to advocate for how these outcomes really build upon themselves and how this magnifier effect comes to play when we truly invest in full volunteering support.
Thank you, Farzana. And I just want to acknowledge, I think, Clement, I'm still reading your comment, but thank you for sharing the example of the study that you were part of. Very helpful. Sue.
Hi, thanks so much for this this conversation. I think it's overdue and much needed. One of the things that I think is interesting, so as a former volunteer center director, I appreciate the push to get more people to volunteer. And I also twitch a tiny bit when I see things like doubling the number of volunteers, just because I know sometimes we get so focused on getting more people to volunteer, we haven't had that companion conversation of the conditions at the organizations that will allow them to be supported. And it can also take us off track when we push for numbers to asking that bigger question of how do we engage the community in our work in a meaningful way. So I just would love to hear a little bit about how you're going to balance that tension of wanting to get more volunteers, but also doing that sort of in a container of it has to be a capacity, there has to be capacity for those volunteers to have somewhere to go and to have a good experience.
Sure. It's 100% baked into that number and what we will build out as a long-term strategy. We had a lot of conversations about exactly everything that you just said. We have to make sure that every volunteer, the current ones today, and as we start to grow numbers, has a good experience. And that's the reason we focused this first investment in a report on the infrastructure and the investments or lack thereof into the infrastructure to support volunteering. We wanted to understand what exists today and what needs to be, I don't want to say fixed, but built upon, strengthened, invested in order to support an overall goal of increasing volunteering. We needed a big, bold number. We need to drive towards something. And we know that volunteering has tremendous impact on individuals, their feelings of connectedness, their trust and connection within community. It's an antidote to loneliness and isolation. It's a bridge builder. So we know there's big impacts on individuals. We absolutely know that nonprofits, many cannot deliver their services and deliver on their mission without the human capital of volunteers. So we feel it's really important that there is an increase, but the investment in this report and the concept of enrolling and enlisting a cross-sector coalition is meant to address what are the infrastructure needs? How do we build the capacity of the sector? How do we create standards of excellence for more meaningful based, community-centered volunteering so that we're building that quality as we are looking to increase the quantity? What that looks like over time, that's why Points of Light can't and won't do this alone. We need the expertise of a lot of organizations across the sector, and we need to work together to develop a plan and be very pragmatic about what are the challenges we'll face, what are the barriers that need to be removed, and how do we make volunteering more accessible and a good quality experience. So I hope that helps just give a little more confidence that we don't want to make you twitch, Sue, and we twitched a lot too, but recognize everything you said as key to success overall. Right, we are getting close to the top of the hour. So are there any final questions? And Sue, okay, thanks. I was gonna say, Sue, I hope that answered the question, or at least started the answer to the question.
There's one more question about where we might find some data on how volunteering increases lifespan and betters mental health. And I will say that there is so much academic research out there. It is all very fragmented. It's not curated and packaged together. And one of the things we at Points of Light aim to do is really to bring all that research together and share it with the sector. So be a resource for you so that you can have all of that data packaged together to share with funders, share with your volunteers, and share with the sector at large. So look for that as we put it together.
Thank you, Farzana. And I see the question too about VTO. I would say anecdotally from our corporate programming work and team, we're not seeing changes one way or the other. I do think that as companies are faced with decisions about where to invest their social impact dollars, there's a huge opportunity for volunteering as a way to continue to engage employees and make connections with community. So our goal is to capitalize on that as much as possible and advocate for increases or new programs if they don't exist already. But I will look into it with our corporate team to see if there's any data that indicates one way or the other. But anecdotally, in a number of conversations in the last, even just since the beginning of this year, I'm not hearing an up or a down. I'm hearing a lot of questions of how do we continue to have social impact, community impact as the cultural and political environment changes. Jessica.
Hi, thank you for answering my question. Yeah, I had a question about how Points of Light and this new network you're building is going to support leaders of volunteers and show nonprofits that the infrastructure that's needed to support volunteerism and good volunteerism includes investing in employees that have volunteer engagement skills and show them that this is not low-skilled work. It's not something that can be done by someone who's just previously been a volunteer or has volunteered. There are specific skills and traits that are needed. How is Points of Light going to do that? Because leaders of volunteers are consistently being paid less on shorter term contracts, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, I hear you and understand the question and the concern. I would say, one, we have this conversation at the Points of Light conference in providing workshops and networking and conversation opportunities about this specifically. But it's also a question for us as we enroll a coalition of groups to think about how do we support more professionalization, more CVAs in the sector. And as we make the case for volunteering's infrastructure and investments in the infrastructure, that includes the staff that support volunteering. So I don't have an answer on we're gonna roll out XYZ program in 1 week, but it is an area that we know needs to be addressed. Thank you, Jessica. I think the other question that I've seen pop in a couple of different places, trying to watch the chat and the Q&A function, is less of a question and more of a, I want to participate. So thank you for that. We will open an opportunity later this year and put out a call for those who want to join and participate. We'll have likely ongoing roundtable focus group discussions where we'll be looking for more input and areas that we need to focus on. So this is just the start of the conversation and the starting point of what we hope is, again, changing the conversation on volunteering. It's clearly struck for all of you. So I'm really, really grateful for all of the engagement and conversation and questions and the answers on the polls. It's exactly the kind of feedback and inputs that we need as we launch into this work. So thank you so much. We will send a thank you follow-up email that will have a link to this webinar and the deck on our website. And appreciate your time today. And hopefully we'll see many of you at Points of Light's conference, which I think is 3 weeks away, maybe. It's crazy how close it is, but hopefully we'll see you in New Orleans. Thank you all so much.